Hi everyone, I'm Dylan Michael Canterbury Baker, and today I'm here with Dave Richards. Mr. Richards, thank you very much for coming on the show.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
So my first
So far.
my first question for you is where did you grow up and what kind of family did you grow up in?
Well, I was born in a small town in Ohio, little college town, about 2,000 people. That my family, both my parents went to college there, so it was like their college town. And I lived there until all the way until first grade, and then we moved to New Jersey. But kind of family, I was the oldest kid. Then I have a sister and a brother, so it's like the classic 3 kids and 2 parents thing. And my parents were, as far as I know, the only people that they ever had sex with, and they were married for like 65 years or something like that. Very traditional, but nice family. I mean, both my parents went to college. My dad had the same job the whole time. Yeah.
Okay,
So
I was wondering too, what kind did the religion or cultures you come from play a role in your upbringing on views towards life?
yeah. I mean, not like. Huh. That's funny. Uh, yeah. Well, I mean, it was white Anglo-Saxon Protestant up the wazoo. It was like so traditional. Um, my mother's family came over in the Mayflower. All 4 of my grandparents went to college. I mean, it was a very kind of white family. We were Episcopalian, so I went to church on Sundays. I got confirmed. All that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly how I would say it influenced my life. I mean, it just was. It was like the air and the water you breathe or swim in or something.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were very, well, my dad's still alive, very upright people, very moral. Like doing the right thing was important. They also liked to have fun. I mean, they would go to jazz clubs in New York when we lived in New Jersey and stuff like that. They saw Charlie Parker, all this stuff I never found out until later. And I think they were both, my mother had an older sister, my father had 2 older siblings, so they were younger, and in the whole sibling order thing, I think they, it's a little easier sometimes for the younger ones. So they were both very happy people.
Okay.
No drama.
And for some reference too, when were you growing up? Like 50s, 60s?
Yeah. All that. I was born at the end of 1949, so I've been alive in a whole slew of decades. The 50s was like until kindergarten. Then we moved to New Jersey, and we lived there for 6 years. So I did kindergarten to 6th grade in New Jersey, which was all different. It was very urban, and I was in college prep classes, and there were. We used to watch American Bandstand on TV after school. I mean, it was like urban kind of. It was a suburb of Philadelphia, and then just when I was going to start junior high school, and I figured out that I was gay by then too. So there was this sort of like, I can't wait to get to the big city, which at that point was Philadelphia. And then my dad got transferred back to Ohio, so we moved back to this town about the same size as Slough.
Okay.
And that was a rough adjustment for me.
Okay. You said that you realized you were gay when you were younger. What led to that realization, and did you know anything about like gay people or culture when you were younger?
Well, I mean, when I started, being sexually aware, I realized I was thinking about men. Oh, right, and I was on the swim team when I was in elementary school, and there was something really compelling about the other swimmers and their Speedos. It was like, oh, look at that. So yeah, it just seemed natural. Although I also knew there was something not right about it. It was like not, there's something I had to keep a secret.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, in the 50s and the early 60s. I think if we had stayed on the East Coast, I might have come out sooner, but it didn't happen that way. In a little town, Ohio, it was all about football and basketball and that kind of stuff. So being a smart kid was not exactly the cool thing to do. Although It worked for me. It was okay.
What was the kind of reaction that people would have towards someone being gay in Ohio where you were?
Oh, I'd kill him, beat the shit out of him, call him names. I mean, not that I ever experienced that, not directly. Um, like I like to wear nice clothes and stuff, which is a little bit gay, but I managed to be like preppy and get picked as best dressed kid in high school. So it was like it's kind of under the radar version of all that. Thursday was known as Queer Day, and you weren't supposed to wear green because that meant you were queer, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, they would talk. People would talk about it. I was always like, I wonder what that's about. I mean, again, as I was in junior high school and high school, especially by high school, I had it all figured out. What I was interested in, what was allowed, what wasn't allowed. I definitely didn't want to walk like that kid who carried his books like a girl. It was but I did like brainy stuff. So I had and I was on the school newspaper and the yearbook and all that kind of stuff. So I had what do you call it? Some social legitimacy. I wasn't like an outsider or suffered for being a little different. I did know some people who were like just kind of effeminate and were really ostracized and made fun of and stuff like that. And I just didn't want to be in that place. So,
did you know any? Were you aware of any kind of gay culture outside of where you lived or in that neck of the woods?
Not really. I mean, there was a magazine store downtown that sold physique magazines. Like from the 50s and 60s, guys in posing straps. I bought a couple of those and hid them in my bedroom. But there weren't like gay bars or anything like that, and there weren't like visible gay people. I remember seeing an article in Life magazine from the 60s about homosexuality in America. It was like a big deal, and so when I read that, I was like, oh, there is a place to go. There are people. I just have to get through this thing about high school and get out of my house, and then I can maybe start exploring some of this stuff.
And when you saw that, what cities were you thinking of? Because the big guys are L.A., San Francisco,
it was
maybe
L.A.
Chicago.
and New York mostly. It's funny because I ended up moving to L.A., but there were pictures of guys like hanging out on street corners and stuff like that. And also, I was aware through sort of literature and history that there was gay culture out there. I could tell by the time I was in like junior high school or high school, I could tell when I was reading something. They're like references to Oscar Wilde and stuff like that. It was clear to me that there was a gay culture. It was just like I couldn't get to it because I was stuck in this little town.
No, that definitely is a wee bit of a parody to where we're here right now.
Yeah, I know. I know. It's interesting to have had a whole gay life and then end up in a place like this, but
we'll get to that later.
Yeah,
That's an important part of this. But getting back to the high school age, so were you trying to like specifically look for a type of college that was in an area that at least there was you knew more gay culture existed or people or?
Well, the college in my hometown, which we had moved back to, both my parents went there. My father's mother went there. My father's grandfather was president of it. It was like the family college, and I got accepted without even applying. And it was like, no way I was going to go to that school and only be 5 miles from home, I wanted to be an architect, so I applied to 3 schools that had the best 3 architecture programs. One of them was in Connecticut, one's in, at that time, in Philadelphia, and one was in St. Louis. So I figured, but no, actually, so I didn't make those decisions based on any desire to be around gay culture, except that Connecticut's close to New York. It wasn't like premeditated. It didn't determine my choices.
And where did you end up going to college?
Yale.
Okay, so you ended up in Connecticut, New Haven, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
Was
in
there
1968.
Was there any sort of like gay culture there in '68 when you came there, or what was it like in New Haven at that time?
It was a really interesting time because Yale was not coeducated then. It was just all men. And I guess that must have been part of the reason I made that choice. I don't know. I don't think Penn was co-ed. Yeah, the other two were co-ed. But when I got there, it was fall of '68. Um, there was a very strong traditional, like kind of preppy. Now it would be called bro culture. I mean, it's all about going to the football game on Saturday, and they had this. The social life consisted of mixers, and busloads of girls from the Seven Sisters colleges, which were all female colleges, would show up on like Friday night or Saturday night, and everybody would be dressed up and wearing coats and ties, and the girls would be in nice little dresses and shit, and then there'd be like parties in the dining halls. We lived in residential colleges, and each one had a dining hall, and there'd be a band and a lot of beer, and everybody would dance and get really drunk, and then run upstairs and fuck, and then the girls would get on the bus and go back to their colleges, and we'd go back to class. And I found it to be kind of an intimidating ritual. It wasn't what I was into. But that also was a period when there was all this upheaval going on, and by the spring of '69, I think it was the fall of '69, they started admitting women, transfer students from these colleges, to actually be there. So when I was the last class that was all male, and the first class to graduate with full co-eds in it. So it was a real big transition, because Yale was 300 years old at this point. And that whole tradition of male education and all that's a big thing in Oxford and Cambridge and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so my sophomore year, there were women living in the rooms next to us, which was a big change. And we didn't have to wear coats and ties to meals anymore, because one day we all went to meals with coats and ties and no pants on, and they said, "Oh, okay." And everybody started growing their hair long, and hippies were happening, and Woodstock and the Summer of Love and all that. So it went from being very traditional to not very quickly. And I think it was the spring of '69, they started a Gay Students Alliance, I think it was called.
Interesting.
GSA, which came out of the turmoil about the Vietnam War, actually. And Stonewall was the summer of '69. Yeah, so it was just sort of beginning.
Interesting.
And there was, on one hand, it was like, all this anti-war stuff and everything. Everybody wanted to be liberal and woke and all that stuff. So there was a lot of support. There was the Black Studies program started that year. Gay Students Alliance, feminist with the women being the co-eds. But it was also still pretty traditional. I mean, it wasn't like you could go around and like just be openly gay, really. I mean, you could, but it made you stand out.
I was wondering too, a lot of people that I've interviewed in the past have brought up something of a connection between the anti-Vietnam War movement and like the expansion of gay rights. Did you notice that at all, or see anything like that? Or
well, the whole, 67, the Summer of Love, hippies, the anti-war movement. It was all about people being who they thought they authentically were. Whether they were or not might be another issue. And it was also about, the baby boom generation coming of age. So we wanted to have everything on our own terms, right? You want to rebel against your parents and all that stuff. So, so I think it was part of a whole cultural moment that brought out, allowed people to be more individual and to express themselves, kind of. Everybody had long hair and lots of drugs. The drugs helped too. I think everybody was just loose. It was really nice, actually. The '50s were very Republican and uptight and all that stuff, and it was a really noticeable change.
Another thing I wanted to ask you on, considering New Haven to New York's not an outrageous distance.
Right.
How was the effect of the Stonewall riots or whatever stuff on that area?
Well, I started spending more time in New York on weekends and stuff like that. Not a lot, because I was, Yale, you got to study all the time. But there was a lot of, people going back and forth. Like I said, the Gay Students Alliance started, and then morphed into something else. I remember going to some early meetings, and then it became sort of more integrated into the whole university experience. Like it was legitimized, right? Like black studies were legitimized, feminists, it all became sort of part of everyday life really quickly. Like I would say in a year.
Wow.
And then what was I going to say? Kent State happened in the spring of 1970, and so all the anti-war stuff became much more militant. And New Haven was having one of the Chicago Seven. Bobby Seale was on trial in New Haven. I forget why he wasn't in Chicago, but did something in New Haven. And so there was this Black Panther trial going on, and the university was compelled, sort of, by its own combination of fear and good intentions, to close classes and shut down everything that spring, and everybody just kind of went to demonstrations and learned about stuff. And when there's tear gas, and because they were gonna, a bunch of people said they were gonna blow up the university if we didn't shut it down. So they shut it down. Yeah. So my sophomore semester, basically, I didn't go to class much. Took a lot of acid, and that kind of thing.
It had to affect your view on life.
Yeah.
In a fun, strange way.
I dropped my architecture major too, because it seemed to me to be very limiting. I mean, there were so many. I came from a town of 50,000 in the middle of nowhere, but I had been exposed in my life to larger cultural stuff, and suddenly here I was in this place that was like a kids' candy store. I mean, the best. I had a seminar class with Norman Mailer. I had a seminar class with Helen Frankenthaler. You could just sit around with these people and talk to them, and they would talk to you like you were adults almost. So it was just a very rich experience, and I didn't want to just be stuck off in the architecture school all the time. And I wanted to take classes in history and French and literature and all this kind of stuff. So I just figured, well, I'll have a career someday. I'll let that take care of itself later.
When you mentioned, too, when you were younger, you were kind of learning more about other histories, and also learned more that gay people have existed throughout Eurasia, Africa, the globe.
Yeah. Greece and Rome, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when you were finishing college, I was wondering, too, what was it like with the Gay Student Alliance, I believe you said the term was? Was it getting attacked? Was it more accepted? What was the mentality
it was accepted.
towards it?
Well, and that's when I came out, when my the winter of my sophomore year, I think. I mean, like, officially came out and started having sex with men and women a little bit. So it was all mixed up in my memory and my mind with accepting myself too, and I made friends who weren't students, who lived in town, and I would go to bars and stuff, meet people, go to New York with my friends. I had two roommates who were gay by my junior year. But we got an apartment off campus. And I just started operating in a slightly more diverse world, I guess I would say. And there were more student organizations, and there were newspapers and all that kind of stuff. And in the summer of 1970, I went to Europe. It must have been the summer of 71 that I stayed there and worked as a house painter. I met a lot of local people that way, Yeah.
Which nation did you go to?
I hitchhiked all over Europe. Flew to France, went to Amsterdam, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Although it wasn't exactly, I didn't have sex the whole time I was in Europe. It was weird. Paris, Avignon, Barcelona. Oh, right, because I still had a girlfriend who's in Monte Carlo for the summer, so I went to Monte Carlo to meet her. And she wanted to have sex, and I had to go buy condoms in a Catholic country, and I was just like, I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to have sex with her anyway, so that didn't go well. And then Florence, Vienna, back across Germany, Munich, back to France, and then home.
Hmm.
It was great. I hitchhiked everywhere. Did a lot of hitchhiking actually in the United States too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you came back, you were in your, I guess, final year of college?
No, that was after my sophomore year, so I had 2 years left. So junior and senior year.
In your final years of college, did you notice like a larger kind of cultural shift in the nation? Because there was a lot of essentially turmoil and change occurring.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know how much this has to do with me being more comfortable being gay and coming out, and how much I think my sense is that like by 1970 or 71, there were just a lot more like sort of very public gay bars and stuff. I mean, especially in New York. Mm-hmm. There always been gay bars in New York. There's this famous old bar called Julius's that's been there like since the 30s, I think. But the disco was starting to happen, so it was a much more what do you call it? Foregrounded kind of cultural phenomenon than it had been before. People didn't feel like they had to hide anymore. I mean, you could still be arrested and stuff like that, but not very much. You didn't feel like I didn't feel endangered.
Okay.
So it really felt like I was in this wonderful place, right, where I'm like getting to do what I want to do, and the culture is not telling me not to do it.
Mm-hmm. Now, after you graduated, when you were starting more work, was it okay to be openly gay, or was that a problem where you were?
Well, my first job was working in the Yale Library. I didn't, having ditched my architecture training, I was like the classic dilemma of the liberal arts graduate. What are you going to do? And I didn't want to teach. And I had this apartment with some friends. It was the first floor of a house. And I was, I don't know if when I met, I was going to New York a lot too, and I met my first boyfriend, I think in the fall of 72. And then he came up to New Haven because he was a theater director, so we did put on plays that some of my friends were in, and a lot of back and forth to New York for 72 and 73, and I ended up living in New York by the end of, by 73, in Jules's apartment. Wait, I lost track of what was the question again?
So you answered it. After you finished college, was it okay to be openly gay in a work environment?
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, working at the library, no problem. I think they already had sort of gay-friendly rules about employment and stuff at the university. But I also had some job interviews in New York because I did have some training in architecture in terms of I could draft and stuff like that. And I remember going on this one interview, and I had long hair. My hair was like yours, actually. And I put on my fanciest suit and went to the Yale Club in New York for an interview with this guy who was going to fix me up to sell commercial real estate in New York. And I thought, well, I can move to the big city. I'll be fine. No. First of all, he looked at me like, what are you, why did they let you go to Yale? You look like some kind of hippie faggot. Which was true. And so I realized I was sort of not a good match culturally for, anything except the occasional head shop or bookstore or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Health food store, all of which are places I did work later.
Okay. Now, I was wondering, too, how did you end up coming out west? Because you were set up in New York can be a good place to be.
Yeah. Although not in the early 70s. It was really terrible. It was bankrupted. But I like I said, I met this guy, and we spent most of, well, actually I had two boyfriends, but he didn't know about the other one. By the spring of 73, he got a job teaching theater at a university in California, and he said, I'm going to move to California. You want to come with me? And I said, yeah. I mean, I'm not doing anything here. I might as well go see the world. And I had just spent the winter working in a library underground with no windows, and I was just like, I need some sunshine. So we moved from the East Village to Riverside, which was a shock in a lot of ways. But it was a university environment, so UC Riverside's a big campus. So I found myself in California in the summer of 73.
Okay. I was too. You were aware LA had a lot more gay culture, but in Riverside at the time, was
Oh,
there
nothing.
nothing?
No. Except for students, they had a gay students group, and my uh, partner was teaching theater, so hello, there's all kinds of stuff going on. But yeah, we used to drive into LA on Friday and Saturday to go out dancing and stuff like that,
Hmm.
which was tricky and high heels and drugs and all that shit. But we never got killed, so that was good. Yeah, lots of partying in those days, much partying.
Was more of the gay culture in the LA area more party based, or what was it like
Oh, no.
during that time?
Well, my experience, I mean, it's discos, Ooh. I will survive. Um, and bathhouses were starting up. It was just it was very sexualized. Everything was sexualized. There was a big political stuff happening, sort of following on the anti-war stuff. The early gay liberation people, were becoming more political, and it wasn't too long. Oh, 3 or 4 years. There was a woman named Anita Bryant who tried to outlaw gay teachers, I think it was, and so there was a big campaign to keep her out, and I got really involved in that, going door to door, mailing envelopes, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think too, because
It was like community activism.
Wasn't she involved in trying to block gay teachers in Miami-Dade County, and it
she was
spread
in Florida.
over with the whole Briggs initiative here?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There were actually that might have been two separate campaigns. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I believe it is two separate ones.
Yeah, I can't remember specifically what it was she was against, but it wasn't. She was just a bitch. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was partly the age I was at. I was like 25 or 26 or whatever. So it was all party all the time, as opposed to serious political organization.
I was wondering too, at that point, up until that point in your life, what kind of changes politically have you seen towards gays in the environment of the U.S.? Because you're going from one more cosmopolitan region of the Northeast to another more cosmopolitan region.
Yeah. Well, right. That's why, because they were sort of cosmopolitan, safe for gay people, and both of them had a long history of gay people. In L.A., there was West Hollywood was always part of L.A. County. It wasn't part of the city, so it had been. And there were always a lot of gay people around the movie industry. Like designers and set designers and makeup people and all that stuff, in the support industries, and they always lived in West Hollywood because they would not get busted by the cops as easily. And also a lot of the nightlife scene was in West Hollywood for that very reason, because the LAPD couldn't go there and arrest people. So you had like on Sunset Strip there were all these kind of like movie star nightclubs, Mocambo and Ciro's, and there's a little bit of mafia involvement and all that kind of stuff. So it was a little bit outlawish, kind of. Yeah, because a lot of LA was just might as well have been Iowa, But there were pockets in all the little towns of. The other thing about LA's gay history was a lot of people who went to World War II. They went there to work or to in the war industries, or they went there and shipped out and then came back. So there was a whole lot of population growth and single people in LA in the late 40s, 50s, 60s.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was the rich cultural mix. It wasn't so, there wasn't as much, what do you call it, high-end culture, like symphonies and orchestras and operas and that kind of East Coast stuff. But there was a very, well, I shouldn't say that, there is in New York too, but there was a very sort of accessible gay culture in LA. Also, combined with the whole sort of outdoorsy thing, the beach and surfers and, that whole blonde surfer dude thing. That was a thing. If you look at porn films from the 70s, They're all these blonde surfer dudes, right?
Okay, let's keep it clean.
That's clean. It's clean. It's very good.
No, that's a good point to bring out to the environment, because I mean, back east, winter's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, I mean, it's like, I'm trying to think. Have you ever seen the movie Boys in the Band? Okay. Well, that's like the quintessential East Coast gay 60s thing. You know, they're all dressed up and they're in apartments and they're all indoors all the time. And I can't think of a analogous LA thing. Maybe Play It As It Lays, but that's not really gay theme. I have to think about that.
Now, at this point, what year is it? You're getting be a little more involved in essentially, not politics, but
yeah, like 74, 5, 6.
Okay.
Well, we had moved from Riverside to Santa Ana because I had a job in San Clemente and I was commuting 75 miles each way and he was commuting 1 mile. And I said, we're going to live here. You know, I just picked a place in the middle, which was this weird sort of swinging singles apartment complex. But it didn't last very long. I think by the summer of 74, we broke up. He went to do a residency in the Provincetown Playhouse. And he brought somebody back with him. So I moved out and moved to LA, you know, big city, finally.
LA proper?
Yeah, moved to Hollywood.
Okay.
Ready to, you know, party down, sow my wild oats, all that kind of stuff. And like 3 months later, I met my next boyfriend, and we were together for 3.5 years. So,
what was this also essentially culture and climate like? Because this is kind of the lead up to AIDS too.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Well, it from like 72 to 73 to 1980. So it's like 7 or 8 years. It was just very oh God, it's like a carnival. I mean, you know, you had your surfer dudes, you had your lumberjack guys with the mustaches and the plaid shirts, and there were all these discos everywhere, and everybody just went out and partied a lot. By that time, I had a pretty, reasonably responsible job in an architectural firm. But I'd stop at the bar after work every day. It was like Cheers, kind of, and hang out with my friends, and then on weekends we'd, go dancing and stuff like that. Lots of casual sex. After centuries of being repressed, gay people were like horny. So that was kind of, and again, Southern California really lends itself to that. You're outdoors all the time. And despite the fact that everybody's in cars all the time, you'd meet a lot of people just driving around. I mean, you'd kind of like make eye contact with somebody, and next thing you know, you're at somebody's house. Yeah.
Okay. So at this point, I was wondering too, could you talk a bit about the effect on AIDS of the gay community, or would you like to pass over that particular question?
The effect of AIDS on the gay community? Well, so, not a big effect. So the second partner I met, we broke up after 3.5 years, so I was single again, like from 78 to 81, I think. And I do remember thinking that the whole sort of party atmosphere was getting a little tiresome. I mean, I was getting older too. I was like coming on to 30 or so, and working hard, trying to make a career. And there was, you can only have like so much, casual sex, and then it begins to become repetitious and boring. So I happened to meet somebody in the summer of 81, and we like fell in love and started a really serious relationship that lasted for 11 years. And he was a nurse, and he was an infection control nurse, and he had, one of the things I found in his papers later was this first article about the gay cancer from the summer of 81. He clipped that out and saved it. And it's really a good thing that we sort of settled down right then, because, either one of us would have been a really likely candidate to get AIDS. But we were busy, like, having this little married life, you're in your 30s, you're like, you don't have kids, but like you get a house and you like, take vacations and you do all this kind of grown-up stuff. Yeah, so that lasted for about 11 years. Although, oddly enough, he got AIDS. around 1990, and I didn't. So there was obviously something I wasn't aware of in our relationship at that point. But from 81, 82, well, yeah, because the first house I owned was I got together with 7 friends, and we bought an 8-unit, 4 duplexes that were together around a courtyard in Hollywood. And they were all gay. Everybody was gay, and we were all, it was like this little gay, apartment thing. It was like Tales of the City, sort of, but in LA. And pretty soon, all my business partners and friends and neighbors started dying or getting sick and dying. I mean, like, of the 8 of us, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know 5 for sure died of AIDS by the time I moved out. Yeah, it was like, I still don't know if I processed it really. It was, I have a piece of paper where I kept writing down the names of my friends who died, and there's like 100 people on the list.
Wow.
I don't have any friends from my 30s because they all died, I mean, it was good that I was in a relationship because we had business friends and work friends and stuff like that, but all my sort of casual, gay bro friends died, and I went to a lot of funerals. And yeah, and then when Rory got sick, by that time, AIDS had been around for 9 or 10 years, and he was in healthcare, so it was just really, I don't know, it was kind of grim, it was weird. By that time, we'd bought a house in the hills up by the Hollywood sign, and we were, having a nice life, and then all of a sudden, he's like sick and can't go to work, and yeah, it all fell apart.
Another question I did have for you, you talk about how your folks were more traditional, essentially like Anglo-American kind of mentality. Were they more accepting of you being gay, or what was that like?
It was fine, actually. I mean, when I first told them, I was in college, and I wrote a letter saying I wasn't coming home for Thanksgiving because I was in love with a man, and which was somebody I knew for about 2 weeks, but it served its purpose. And they were really upset because I was the oldest son, and all that kind of thing. But and they had met my girlfriends, but they got a therapist, and they worked through it, and they were like really supportive. They started a Parents and Friends of Gays group. And I know one time my mom said to me that she was really glad that I had been gay because they got to learn all this stuff about the world they never would have known if they didn't have a gay child. So I thought that was kind of like, well, it was okay. And they were very close to my, both my lovers, Rory, when he died, they were really upset about that. They were there actually for 6 weeks while he was busy dying. And the nurses and his parents were there. It was a really rough time.
Okay. And so how, essentially to my understanding, it was a cocktail of drugs that started doling it down and making people be able to live more, and this was more in the 90s.
Yeah, in the mid-90s. I mean, Rory died in 92. He was about, if he hadn't fucked around for another 2 years, he might still be alive, but then I wouldn't have had the same life I have. Yeah, so it started to be, it was a long time. It was like until 2000 before it wasn't really a death sentence anymore, as I recall. And the early cocktails were pretty rough. I mean, it would, the drugs would kill you if the AIDS didn't kill you. It was, but yeah, I mean, now I have a friend who's been positive for 30 years. He's fine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you notice essentially like an upswing of gay culture after drug cocktails became more viable as an option to sustain yourself?
Well, I wasn't, let's see, Ray died in 92, so I was single from 92 to 97. I would say, I don't know, in LA, I don't know if I call it an upswing. I mean, I was out, doing things with people, being careful, but it certainly wasn't like the 70s. That's why it happened, because everybody was just so, piggish in the 70s. But there was plenty of, stuff to do. It's also different when you get older. You do different things. And by the time I was in my 40s, my career was really important to me, and I had, like financial responsibilities and all that kind of stuff. It's like you can't just go out and dance all night, even if you wanted to, and I didn't really want to.
Well, something I also wanted to ask you, because at this point, like not mid to later 90s, there's been a considerable change in essentially gay rights. I mean, the Netherlands legalizes same-sex marriage, and I want to say '01 properly, because there's been a considerable upswing even throughout the U.S. and many other nations.
Well, it's a lot more. It's focused, to my mind, my experience, it was focused on employment law and, discrimination kind of issues. And the gay marriage thing was starting to become a real focus of people's interest. Although I ended up married, I was never really much of a believer in the whole gay marriage thing, just because I come from this background where the whole point of being gay was to be different from the sort of the bourgeois model. So, why would you want to do all that? But I'm trying to remember, there was some political stuff that I was involved in the early 2000s. I don't think, that might have been 2000. Well, that was the No on 8 campaign. That was the thing about gay teachers, the Briggs Initiative. I got involved in, campaigning against that.
Okay, so getting back to your story, at this point, later 90s, what were you doing? Or were ya...
Well, I was in LA. I was working in my job. I was in the same job for 35 years, the same company for 35 years. We went from 6 employees to 600 in that period, so, things changed. And I met my husband, Jeff, in 1997. So, and we settled down, and we're like, really bonded, monogamous, like from the day we met. It was really odd. That's always sort of been my habit, though. Like, I'll be very, monogamous when I'm in a relationship, and when I'm not, I'm really not. And that's how we met. We met in a dark bar, But I think we were both looking for someone at the same time, and we just happened to find each other. So that was Thanksgiving of '97. So from then on, my life went a whole different, kind of thing. I mean, very much involved with each other. I was living in the house that my previous lover and I bought, and Jeff said, we should sell this and move to a condo. It's too much trouble to take care of, and I don't like to garden, and we could travel and do this other stuff. And I thought, yeah, why not, So we moved, and we got involved in art and sort of art-related nonprofit stuff, and it's like this whole other life happened to me.
Wow.
Which was great, yeah.
Okay, so more of like the married kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. Except we weren't married. I mean, we were both, this isn't too X-rated, but, we were like both into leather and bondage and stuff like that, and we would go out, kind of dressed up and carry on sometimes publicly, just because, it was like turned us on. But then, we'd go to work, and we worked together for 12 years, and, we'd have coats and ties on, and I'd be in business meetings, and then we ended up both being on the boards of arts nonprofits, and, that was very public service oriented, and we became public in a sense, in the art world sense. I mean, we knew a lot of people. We went to a lot of things. People, you can find us on the internet. There's a lot of stuff,
Okay. So getting back to the art and whatnot, I were you heavily involved in like trying to ever make art, or what were you doing in the art scene in the LA
I
area?
wasn't. Jeff was. He was. Although that was mostly later in his life. He had a blog called Notes on Looking that was very influential in LA for about 15 years. And we both collected art, as you can see. And we did that by meeting artists and meeting people who ran galleries. And it just sort of became our whole world. It was really odd, actually, now that I think back on it. I mean, and we, and that leads to why I'm in SLO, actually, because
that's the next question.
yeah, should I just go there then? Well, yeah, I mean, after about, let's see, we met in 97, we started doing the art thing in like 98, maybe, 2000. And, you know, we were very well known amongst a lot of people, but, you know, it was like, we weren't going to start suddenly spending $25,000 or $100,000 on paintings because we didn't have that kind of money. And, we also, around 2009 or 10, you know, there was like the economic meltdown, and the art world went into one of its periodic flunks. And, you know, we go to openings, we'd see our 500 best friends for 5 minutes, and it was kind of like nobody had quality time together. In LA, you're geographically separated, and artists are off working in their studios, and it's hard to kind of get together and have serious dialogue. And for a lot of, we found this town called Parkfield by flying over it. And we drove up there a little bit because we liked this part of the landscape and this part of the country. And we found this ranch, and we met these people that own this ranch. And it has this beautiful, it's sort of like a small conference facility. I mean, there's 6 twin bedrooms and a big dining hall and a kitchen and a fire pit, and it's 200 miles from LA, and it's really different from LA. And we had stayed there a couple of times. We thought, you know, maybe we should bring some friends up here. So we started doing that. We'd bring groups of artists up to Parkfield 4 times a year. We did that for 5 years, and got really, it's funny, we were more embedded in the art world, but in a more personal way, and with, you know, these 200 friends that we brought up here. And they started coming to visit us, and in 2013, we decided we didn't want to go back to LA, so we moved to Parkfield, which was like, well, the people who knew us knew exactly why we were doing it, but a lot of people were just like, what, are you crazy? I mean, you know, we went from 18 million people to 18. And at that point, I retired from architecture, and Jeff really came into his own as an artist, and stopped doing the blog because he wasn't in LA anymore. Yeah, so we sort of made a life there. And oddly enough, my dad came to visit after when he turned 90. He said, I better come visit you because I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but, you know, later. And we were fixing dinner for him, and we were living in this little, you know, double wide in Parkfield, this town of 18 people with a bunch of cowboys. We were making him dinner, and he said, you know, you guys are a good team. You ought to get married. And I was like, what? He never said that before. And Jeff had given me, we had wedding rings, actually, because he had a wedding ring that he got from his mother that has 3 sets now. It has 3 sets of names in it. His great-grandfather and grandmother from 1888.
Wow.
His mom and dad from 1955, and then us, we did this in 2000. We just exchanged rings. And we sort of thought of ourselves as married, even though we weren't. But then, you know, by 2014, we actually could get married. And when my dad said you should get married, we kind of looked at each other and went, well, maybe, you know, I mean, it would be good for taxes and stuff like that. And I don't know, we'd become we were sort of at an age when we weren't as invested in being outsiders and rebels and we had sort of were outsiders anyway. I mean, we lived in fucking Parkfield, you know. So it wasn't going to like undercut our self-image. So I told him that, yeah, you know, we can get married, but you got to ask my dad for his permission. So he called my dad up, and my dad was like freaked out because Jeff never called. He thought I died or something, and he said, "No, take him, please. I've been trying to get rid of him for 65 years." So we got married in 2014 in Parkfield. We had a big wedding.
Congratulations.
Yeah, all our friends came out from LA, all these artists, and the Parkfield, for those of you who don't know about it, is a sort of a destination resort for all things Western, and they do lots of weddings with hay bales and horses and shit. So they did our wedding. They were more than happy. We were the first gay wedding in Parkfield history. I think the only one so far. And we had this wonderful life. And Jeff, we built a studio so Jeff could paint and draw outdoors. And we would go back and forth to LA. Partly, Jeff had some health things he had to deal with, and our doctors were in LA, so we'd go back and forth once or twice a month. And see our friends. Then we had a lot of people that come up and stay with us because they just love to get out of the city and get to the country. We had room for 3 or 4 couples at a time. So it was this really idyllic life. And then in 2018, Jeff was diagnosed with brain cancer.
Ooh. Out
of the blue. This is somebody who had diabetes since he was a kid. He had a kidney pancreas transplant. He had prostate cancer surgery, and all of that was overcome, and we were both having this wonderful life, and then we weren't. It was like really out of the blue, like, what, brain cancer? What, Yeah, so he lived for 13 months, then he died in May of 19.
What gave you the strength to go on after such a colossal loss of a spouse?
Well, I was going to say you don't have much choice, but you actually do have a choice. Well, I think, let's see, he died in May. I sought some therapy, and there's a hospice of SLO does a spouse support thing. And I got a therapist, and I was seeing them for like a while, I think in September, maybe, October. And then they mentioned that they had a group thing, support group. So I joined that support group, and that's basically how I got through it. And I'm also, looking back on it, I mean, I have been through a lot of different things in my life. I've had a lot of chapters. And, I guess I just wasn't ready to sort of pack it in. But I also, I realized after a while that I really couldn't spend the rest of my life in Parkfield. It was pretty isolated, and, as you get older, you want to be near a hospital and stuff like that. So
I was going to ask, what brought you to SLO?
My truck. Well, I was going to this support group, and I would come down here every week for that. Sometimes I'd stay over and just go out to eat or whatever, just to be in in the world again, kind of. Because right after he died, I spent some time with my family. I went back to visit them a couple times and just, and then I met these 2 guys who were in this gay book club I belonged to, who actually live even farther out in the country than I do. They've been there 30 years. And they introduced me to the book club and to some other people. And I started meeting, having people I could sort of go and socialize with in SLO. And I decided that I should probably move here. I got involved in the art museum too, because that was something Jeff and I had already started. We'd met the previous director, and I thought, well, I've always done that before. I mean, you really just have to pick up the pieces, And I did several things that were to honor Jeff's memory. I'm still working on some of that stuff. So I was going to move to a life care community. I figured, I'd be old, they'll take care of me. It's not built yet, so I would still be in Parkfield, which would just be awful. But fortunately, this woman told me in the support group, told me about this manufactured home community, and here I am. It was like, oh, I could do that. And it's in the middle of COVID too. I bought a place, I moved here, and it was a year ago today. The movers, Meathead Movers, came up to Parkfield, drag the rest of all the big stuff. I'd spent like 3 or 4 months beforehand doing remodeling and moving stuff.
Okay.
So,
Before we finish out, I wanted to ask you, what advice or words of wisdom do you have for young LGBTQ plus people today?
My phone number. Well, don't dismiss older gay people. There's a lot you could learn, oddly enough. I mean, I had some really wonderful mentors in my life. You know, there's always some of this, I don't know, it's a weird tension, but there's some really great people that I learned stuff from. Don't isolate yourself ever. You know, I mean, especially now. You know, when I was a kid, it was like, you know, you couldn't run around being gay. Now everybody can run around being gay. It's wonderful. Vote, for God's sake. And build a community. I mean, that was the one thing about the 70s that was, and 60s and 70s that I think people could learn from today. You know, there was no internet, there were no cell phones. So like, you had to go out and like be physically present with other people, and people were really motivated to do that because of the war protests and other things. And then there was like, you know, the whole, in the gay community, the whole sort of madness of disco and everything. And I know now, and it's not just because SLO's a relatively small place, but there's no sort of queer spaces in this town, really. And I think, and this is not just for SLO, but it's everywhere. You know, one reason there aren't a lot of them is because people just go on their cell phones, their internet or whatever, and they meet people that way. And it's like, you know, get out there and like, go somewhere, you know, with a group of people, do something in person with people. Yeah, because it's a lot more meaningful and life is short, believe it or not. And I think you'll be a lot happier if you do that.
Okay. Well, Mr. Richards, thank you very much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Mr. Richards. Wow. That sounds so old.
All right.
Great.